Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Spurned by the Groom's Mother. Chapter 1. Rosie, dear, go wake up your sisters, will you? Her father asked, resting his axe on his shoulder. And Thomas, help your sister carry the wood. Yes, Papa. Rosie stood for a moment, watching her brother. Thomas was just 9, but already he was with their father every morning, chopping wood, tending the livestock, and learning everything he needed to one day take over the farm. Which was a good thing. Ever since being injured during the war, their father could no longer do much on his own. Rosie was the eldest of the 6 kids, so despite the help of the other children, the bulk of work was still on her. Usually, she didn't mind. Although lately, she found herself daydreaming about leaving and having a home of her own. Rosie held the wood carrier on one side, and Thomas grabbed the other side. Together, they trudged into the house and set their load down by the fireplace. It was a chilly Pennsylvania morning, so they had to move fast, both to warm up the house and to have the fire ready before their mother returned from the market to make breakfast. Stoke the fire, Tommy, but be careful, okay? Remember what Papa told you about playing with fire. I know. The boy rolled his eyes at her mothering and got to work, arranging the wood in the fireplace. Rosie ruffled his hair and stepped into the adjoining bedroom. Wake up, girls. Mama will be home soon. The 4 sisters slept in one wide bed, next to each other like kittens. When they heard Rosie's voice, they began to stir, stretching and yawning. Come on now, Rosie added, a little louder. She went outside then and walked to her horse. Her mother had left for the market quite some time before, and Rosie knew she would have to be fetched. Her mother was a neighborly woman and couldn't resist wishing a good morning to every one of her friends. Sometimes, Rosie got annoyed with having to keep an eye on everyone in the family while her mother was off chattering with her friends, but at least the morning rides to bring her home gave Rosie some time of her own. She relished the wind in her hair and the cool sunlight on her skin. She wondered if it was a taste of what true freedom felt like. Soon, Rosie was in the town and tying the horse to a hitching post next to her mother's. She walked through the market, greeting familiar faces and sharing smiles with some of the younger men, who were all clearly taken by her appearance. She couldn't help imagining one of them proposing marriage and taking her away from her parents' house, perhaps someplace warmer. There she is, she muttered to herself. Her mother's strident voice carried through the crowd, and Rosie quickly found her next to the fish wagon. I was just telling Mr. and Mrs. Rogers here what a hard worker you are, Rosie. Ain't it so? Good morning, Mr. Rogers. Good morning, Mrs. Rogers, Rosie said. I try to be, Mama. Ain't she lovely, though? Her mother laughed, and Rosie tried to smile with her. Truth was, Rosie had precious little time for friendly chats, for there was still more than a day's worth of work ahead. She knew the merchants weren't particularly keen on spending their morning talking with her mother either. Mama, we need to go home. The girls are up, and Thomas has made the fire. Oh, wonderful, her mother said and turned back to the merchant. My Tommy helps out his father. Such a smart little boy. Sounds like a fine young man, for sure. Mr. Roger appeared ready to move to other customers, so Rosie decided to help him out. She picked up her mother's bag from the ground, laden with fruit and vegetables, and started back toward their horses. When she was some 30 feet away, she heard Mama say goodbye to the merchant and scurry after her. What's the hurry, dear? She asked, once she had caught up. Breakfast. Everyone is hungry, and I still have things to take care of before that. After a short pause, her mother said, well, perhaps if you started getting up earlier. Rosie tried to ignore the anger building inside her. I wish I could, but I go to bed so late every night as it is. Mind your tone, young lady. You aren't the only one going to bed late every night, you know. We all work hard to feed your sisters and your brother, and I deserve some respect. Rosie suppressed a groan. Only if palavering with Mr. Rogers and his wife is considered hard work, she thought. Mama continued. Now, I have some things to discuss with you. I was meaning to talk to you at breakfast, but since we have some time on our way home, I'll do it now. Rosie fastened the bag to the saddle and untied her horse, ready to head home. She climbed up into the saddle. Of course, Mama. Your sister's is growing up mighty fast, dear, and so is Thomas. He is a great help to your father at the farm, but the girls is still young. We are doing what we can, but we have 8 mouths to feed, and you know how much food children need. Rosie feared where this was headed, and she found herself already getting vexed. Yes? I was speaking to Mrs. Johnson this morning, and she told me she plans to hire another seamstress at her shop. It is a well-to-do business, and of course the tailor will need a helper. I know how well you sew, so I thought you could help her out. Rosie nearly fell off the horse. How much work did her mother expect her to do? There weren't enough hours in a day as it was. Suddenly, she wanted to ride as fast as she could away from her mother and from their farm. To finally escape. But she didn't. She couldn't, she knew she couldn't. No, Mama, I can't. There is so much to do at home that I simply couldn't. Her voice trailed off. She had a sudden thought and glanced inside her mother's bag. Did you get the medicine for Papa? Her mother put a hand to her forehead. I must have done forgot. Take these coins, dear. I will wait for you here. Rosie dismounted, took the money, and hurried to the apothecary. Chapter 2. On her way to the druggist, Rosie took deep breaths to calm down. How could Mama ask her to take on extra work? Of course, the money would help, but she wanted so badly to tell her mother to take the position herself. If only she would spend her time in the morning working and not gossiping at the market, maybe they could have that extra income. Rosie grimaced to herself. Of course, as long as she shared a roof with her mother, she would never be so rude to her. She appreciated the work her folks did every day. It was only fair that she gave it her all, too. And Mama was right, the children were growing. At the apothecary, she got the medicine for her father and was about to walk out when she overheard some girls talking at the front of the shop. I promise you, Allie, this is true, said one girl. She appeared slightly older than Rosie, and much better dressed. She must have been well-to-do, as was her friend. If it is, Becky, then how come you're still here? I should think if you could find a proper husband after reading some newspaper, you would be far away from here already. They're called mail-order brides, Allie. Don't you understand? Curious, Rosie inched closer. She had never heard of such a thing, and it seemed to her that the girls were discussing some great secret. The girls ended leaving the apothecary without buying anything, and Rosie followed on their heels, listening closely to every word they said. Buy the newspaper and read one of the last pages, the first girl said. And what might I find there? A list. Grooms from all different states and territories, each of them wanting to find a wife. Could it be true? Could it really be that simple? Rosie's mind reeled. She couldn't imagine finding a husband in a newspaper. And who would ever want to move states without even seeing her groom? If you don't believe me, Allie, it's your problem. They changed the subject after that, and Rosie stopped following them, looking instead for the boy who sold papers on the street corner. She still had some coins left, and her mother wouldn't notice if she spent a little extra. There weren't many papers to choose from, and Rosie quickly found the right one and bought it. She tucked it inside her dress and hurried back. What took you so long? Her mother asked when she arrived. It just took a bit more time than usual, Mama. But, I've got the medicine now. Her mother only frowned and mounted her horse. Rosie did the same. Have you thought about what I said, Rosie? You could get that position. I will think about it, I promise. Just don't take too long, you understand? Some other girl might swoop in and snatch the job. I won't. Back at home, the girls were already dressed and gathered around the table. Thomas was sweeping the floor. Papa was on the porch, smoking, and he helped Rosie and her mother carry the food inside. "I'll be ready in a minute," Rosie said, hurrying to her bedroom on the second floor. She couldn't wait to go through the paper but knew there was no time just yet, so she hid it under her mattress. Mama wouldn't find it there, since Rosie was the one who washed their bed sheets, so there was nothing to worry about. She only had to wait. They had breakfast, and Rosie spent the rest of the day helping around the farm, herding the animals, cooking and washing dishes, and helping her siblings with their reading and ciphering. They were smart kids, but very playful, and when the 5 of them were left together, they tended to get into mischief. In the afternoon, after their nap, they all went to play by the river, and Rosie brought along her paper. While the kids played, she sat on the bank with her feet in the cool water and read. She was careful to keep one eye on them to make sure they didn't get hurt. Exactly as the girl at the shop had said, there were 2 pages of advertisements. They were located on the last pages of the newspaper, and they were all gentlemen from the West. As Rosie read the notices, some of them she dismissed right away. One such advertisement read, "A gentleman, 55 years of age, 6 feet tall, a veteran of the war." Rosie gaped at the words. Her papa was younger than 55. Rosie thought that maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all, because there was a number of similar proposals from older war veterans, but then something different caught her eye. One of the last advertisements on the page read, "A gentleman, 27 years of age, medium height, desires a lady who can read, write, cook, clean, and otherwise support a household. One who will provide love and respect to her husband and be kind with children." Rosie couldn't say what exactly it was that attracted her in those few lines, but to her they sounded like poetry. She imagined the author to be a charming gentleman, perhaps a young soldier, with a straight back and broad chest. His long hair would almost touch his shoulders, and his smile would be bright in the sun. In her imagination, he was smiling at her. Rosie grinned with pleasure. There was a Nebraska address at the end of the short message, and Rosie carefully tore out the advertisement and tucked it away. She leafed through the rest of the paper but found nothing of interest, and none of the other messages came anywhere close to that of her gentleman from Nebraska. Rosie realized that the afternoon was nearly gone, and she needed to get supper started. "Time to go, children," she called. It took a few more tries to finally get through to her siblings, but when she succeeded, they ran home with laughter and screams. She followed them, smiling. Was she really going to write to a stranger? It felt like she was plotting a conspiracy, because once she stepped inside the house, she went to the fireplace and burned the newspaper. Luckily, no one noticed, and with a light heart, she climbed the stairs again to her bedroom. Later, as Rosie prepared the evening meal, she sneaked frequent peeks at her advertisement, reading it over and over again as if she could learn something new about the man who wrote it. She easily memorized the words, but she continued to look at them any chance she got. In the end, she convinced herself that it wasn't a coincidence that she had come to learn about the list in the paper, and that this particular message had attracted her so much. Perhaps, this was exactly the kind of change she had been waiting for. A handsome gentleman, who would take her away from the farm and give her a house of her own. She knew she would make a good wife. Lost in her dreams with the little piece of paper in her hands, Rosie dashed up to her room while she waited for the stew to simmer a bit more. She took a piece of paper and sat down. She was going to do this. Her heart pounding, she picked up a quill and began writing. From Rosie Wilder. To Robert Geller, Lawton City, Nebraska. Chapter 3. It felt strange, at first, to be writing to a man she had never seen in her life. But Rosie had a rich imagination, and so she imagined Robert at his home in Nebraska, waiting for a letter from her. With that vision in mind, she wrote. There was so much she wanted to tell him about herself and about her life, but she knew she should begin slowly. Dear Robert, I found your advertisement in a paper here in Pennsylvania and was charmed. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. She kept this first letter rather short but made sure to give enough information that would show her in a good light. After all, she wanted Robert Geller to feel the same way about her as she felt about him. The letter ended up being just 1 page, and Rosie folded it neatly and tucked it under her mattress, next to the scrap of newspaper. She couldn't wait to send it. She didn't have a chance to post the letter immediately. But early one morning a few days later, Rosie found her mother in the barn, saddling her horse. "Mama, can I go to the market with you today? Doesn't your father need your help inside the house?" Her mother gave her a critical look. Rosie persisted. "Thomas can help Papa with the wood today by himself. It's about time he took on more responsibility, wouldn't you say?" "Well, I can't argue with that. Saddle up then, girl. Besides, I'm getting impatient to hear your thoughts on that seamstress position." Rosie groaned inwardly but said nothing. She pressed a hand to her bodice, where she had hidden the letter. She figured that she could distract her mother from the seamstress conversation by directing her attention to some town gossip. Which was exactly what she did. The market was lively, and as Rosie predicted, her mother immediately found someone to chat with. Using the opportunity, Rosie snuck away, saying she would look for fresh fruit. Mama was so caught up in her conversation that she barely responded to Rosie's words. The post office was around the corner, just past the mercantile and the newspaper office. "Morning, young lady," the postmaster greeted her. Rosie had never been inside before, and she greeted him with a wide smile, looking around the shop in delight. "And good morning to you, sir. I would like to post a letter." The process turned out to be easier than she'd expected. The officer slid the letter into an envelope, sealed it, let her write down the address, and then asked for a coin for a stamp. Rosie handed him the coin, one of the few she kept in a small box under her bed. The man stepped over to the shelf labeled outgoing, and put the envelope into a box labeled Western Territories and States. "Thank you very much," Rosie said. She hurried back to the market. She and her mother bought everything they needed, and her mother never suspected a thing, even though Rosie was smiling the whole way back home. She even smiled through the barrage of pressure her mother put on her regarding the seamstress position, a topic which was never settled. Days passed, and then weeks, but there was no reply from Robert. Rosie kept going by the post office every time she was at the market, but there was never anything for her. She began to question the whole idea, thinking that the letter had been lost, and that it wasn't meant to be. Still, she assured herself that she was doing nothing wrong. Her family was doing just fine, and it was her God-given right to look for a better life for herself. Then, one morning as she stepped into the small post office, the postmaster called to her, "Miss Wilder. I have good news for you." Rosie's face brightened, her head getting light as she nearly danced to the counter. The man produced an envelope, addressed to her. She took it, as if receiving a great gift, and thanked him. "I will see you again soon," she promised. That night after everyone had gone to bed, Rosie lit a candle and carefully opened the letter from Robert. His handwriting was neat, and the letter itself took up both sides of the paper. "Dear Rosie, thank you for your letter. It is with great pleasure that I received and read it. I understand it must have taken a lot of courage to reach out to a stranger, but I hope we won't remain strangers for long." Tears welled in Rosie's eyes as she read his words, and her lips curved into a smile. Robert was courteous and well-spoken, just as she had hoped. He told her all about himself and about his life in Lawton City, Nebraska. It sounded wonderful. Robert had his own house and farmland and was looking for a woman to help him take care of it. Rosie wrote a reply immediately, confessing that she was looking for a change in her life and wanted a new beginning. She mentioned all the skills she had of take care of a household. She folded her letter, and then read Robert's again. The more she thought about him, the more she felt like they had a connection. It seemed like they could take good care of each other. The next morning, Rosie maneuvered the morning carefully, giving herself the opportunity to post her letter. She was so encouraged by the situation that later that day, she began to pack some of her things. Of course, she did so in secret, so as not to cause her parents concern, but she was set on leaving the area. Robert's reply came a few weeks later. As before, Rosie waited until nighttime to read it. Her heart raced as she opened the envelope, soft candlelight illuminating the paper. "Dear Rosie, I cannot express how happy I was to receive your response. I see we have a lot in common, and I feel we could create a wonderful partnership in both life and work. With this letter, you will discover a train ticket that will take you safely to Lawton City, to my home. If you will have me as your husband, Rosie, I would love for nothing more than for you to come to Nebraska. Rosie was overwhelmed, but under her breath, she whispered yes. She took the night to think it over. Even though she couldn't help but have some doubts, her heart told her that accepting Robert was the right decision to make. The very next morning, she gathered her family and told them the truth, every last bit of it. "Don't even think about it, young lady," her mother said, furious. "As long as you are a part of this family, you will not leave this house. And to marry a stranger? Have you lost your senses? Besides, you're going to be a seamstress now." There were more words, but Rosie tuned them out. Mama was being unreasonable. Once her tirade was over, there was only Rosie, her brother, and her father left in the room. In her furor, Mama had taken the girls outside. Chapter 4. Rosie stood before her father. It was hard for her to hide her tears. Her throat began to burn, anger and frustration and perhaps a bit of guilt churning in her chest. She had known her mother would be upset about her decision, but she hadn't expected such venom. It was too harsh. At last, her father limped over to her and gave her a hug. "You are a strong woman, Rosie," he said gently, with a strong spirit. "You have been a great help to all of us around here. And as hard as it is for your mother to accept, the time has come for you to lead your own life." Rosie backed away, her eyes wide. But what about the farm? You will be all right here without me, won't you?" Her father smiled. "In a few short years, Thomas will take it over. You needn't worry about it. We'll do fine. I've already packed, Papa." She saw a flash of pain in his eyes, but he turned around and said, "Tommy, bring down your sister's luggage. She has places to be." Rosie began to smile, then, and a few minutes later, the three of them were out back, loading her things into the cart. "I'm driving you, daughter," her father said. He climbed up and clenched the reins. "Just give me 1 minute," Rosie said. She rushed back to where her siblings were standing, still looking shocked. She gave them each a hug and then approached her mother. "Mama," she whispered. Her mother's lips tightened into a thin line. "I'll miss you," Rosie continued. Her mother squared her shoulders and looked away. Rosie felt her throat tighten. Her eyes misted over and she reached out and gave her mother a stiff hug. "Goodbye, Mama," she said and then fled back to the wagon. Her father flicked the reins on the horse's rump, and the cart lurched into motion. "Just one thing I'll tell you, Rosie," her father said to her when they arrived at the station, "if that man treats you poorly, you let us know." "I will, Papa. I'll write you letters every week, I promise. But promise me to do the same." "Of course, my dear. We might even pay you a visit one day." She thought that highly unlikely, but she didn't say so. Instead, she gave him a kiss and hugged her brother, who had come along. "Take good care of our sisters," she told him with a lump in her throat. They said their goodbyes, and soon, the train took off, taking her far away from her hometown. Rosie was sure Mama was still angry, but she hoped she wouldn't stay angry for long, and that her anger wouldn't be directed at the rest of the family. Once Rosie got situated in Nebraska, she hoped to bring some of her sisters out there with her, if Robert would have them. It would ease the burden on her mother and father if it worked out. The train ride ended up to be more boring and tiring than Rosie could have possibly imagined. By the end of it, she was completely exhausted. It had been exciting in the beginning, since she'd never traveled anywhere before. The scenery was magnificent, especially at sunset and sunrise. She saw mountains and lakes and endless forests, where deer and bears roamed. But as the hours and then the days ticked by, it became more and more challenging. The scenery never seemed to change. The other passengers were getting tired as well, and cranky. Few were still smiling. Needless to say, she was more than happy to finally get off at Lawton City. She spotted Robert almost right away. He was easy to recognize from his photograph. Tall and handsome, he was standing near a bench, searching for her in the crowd. He had an odd look about him, unusually serious and focused and a little worried. "Robert?" she called. He immediately saw her and waved, and then started in her direction. "Rosie? It is nice to finally meet you in person." "It is nice to meet you, too." She expected a hug because of how warm-hearted he'd been in his letters, but he was strangely reserved. "Let me take your things," he said, grabbing her suitcase. She gave it over and followed him down the wooden steps toward the horses. Lawton City appeared larger than her hometown, and even at this early hour, Rosie saw considerably more people around. Tired as she was, she couldn't wait to explore her new home. Robert swung her suitcase into a wagon and helped her climb up. "We have a few things to do first, Rosie." "All right," she replied, even though all she wanted to do was sleep in a proper bed. The wagon took them away from the train station and to the other side of the town, where Rosie saw a little church. It took her a moment to realize that they were heading straight toward it. Suddenly, everything happened so fast. A preacher was waiting for them on the steps, waving for them to come in. Rosie quickly smoothed her hair and followed Robert inside. The marriage ceremony was short and uneventful. The preacher spent a few minutes reading from the Bible, and then they both said their vows. Robert gave her a small kiss, but she barely felt it. They headed out right after the preacher pronounced them man and wife. Robert remained quite stiff with her, which did not help matters. Rosie became less and less sure that she'd made the right decision in coming to Nebraska. In the end, she decided she would forge on and do what was necessary to make it there. She was a married woman now, after all. "It's nice, the church," she said, as they started away. "I think so. I am sorry it was so quick-like, but I reckoned you should be my wife before you took up residence in my house." Rosie took her husband's hand into hers. It was cool and rough, a worker's hand, and that instilled confidence. Robert was a good man, she could feel it, and she was determined to build a life with him. As the wagon rolled on, Rosie noticed they were turning away from Lawton City and heading out toward the fields and farmland. Secretly, Rosie had hoped Robert would have a house close to the city, even though she knew he had a farm. She would have loved to be near town where she could meet new friends. Alas, that was not going to happen. After 2 hours on the road, there was nothing but low wooden houses sparsely scattered about, horses and cows roaming the fields, and some lonely birds soaring in the sky. All in all, the scenery looked eerily similar to that she had left in Pennsylvania. Despite her aching body, she began to doze off, when Robert said, "There is one thing I neglected to mention in my letters, Rosie." She was startled awake. His tone was rigid and a feeling of dread filled her. "What is it?" "I don't live alone on my homestead. I don't have much in the way of a family anymore, but I do take care of my mother." It was a mild surprise, but nothing she couldn't live with. "It's no bother, Robert, I understand." In her eyes, it only added nobility to her husband. She respected a son taking care of his mother and wouldn't complain. "I do feel I must warn you before it's too late. Mother can get," he paused and cleared his throat, "difficult, sometimes. If she strikes you as considering you unwelcome, don't worry. She ain't used to new people around the house." "I see. I will do my best, I promise. We'll get along." Rosie thought of her own mother and was sure that Robert's mother would be fine. He took her hand, and they rode the rest of the way in silence. Rosie wanted to talk to him, of course, but she decided not to bother him too much. She wanted to make a good first impression, and nobody liked a chatterbox. Besides, she was too tired to talk. There would be plenty of time for them to get to know each other better. Chapter 5. As they rode past houses and barns, Rosie tried to guess which one was Robert's. "And now mine, too," she reminded herself with a smile. Some houses were nicer than others, but all were equally far from the ideal image she'd had in her head. Most of them were small, makeshift, and looked like they hadn't been tended well. Nebraska wasn't touched by the war, so she struggled to find an explanation for it. Finally, after riding for some time alongside a crooked fence, they turned onto a narrow dirt road that led to a barn. Even from the distance, Rosie could tell this farm, like others around it, was not particularly well kept. There were patches of yellow grass here and there, and cows and sheep roamed the fields freely. By the old wooden barn, there was a plow, rusted and half buried in the bushes. "It doesn't look like much, I know, but with some work, I know we can make a living off of it," Robert said apologetically. He was visibly uncomfortable bringing her to the place, but Rosie didn't mind. She agreed with him. It would take time, but she was sure they could make the homestead beautiful. Wasn't that why she was there in the first place? To help? "Don't worry, Robert," she said. "It's going to be beautiful." The house itself looked considerably better. Like the barn, it could use fresh paint and new shutters, but she was already falling in love with the two-story building. Robert took the wagon around back. He jumped down and looped the reins about a post. "This way," he said, gripping her suitcase. "Mother should be awake. I hope you two get along." Rosie got down and followed him into the house. The main room was spacious, but like the rest of what she'd seen, it was quite rustic. There was a bit of dust on the floor and on the table in the middle of the room. A rag rug was placed in the center of the floor. 2 of the windows lacked curtains. Rosie smiled. She already saw what she could do to improve things about the house, and that gave her hope. Deeper inside the house, there was a smaller room with a rocking chair and a small desk, as well as a simple davenport in the corner. "You can choose a room," Robert said, gesturing with his arm. "My mother's bedroom is over there, and there's an empty one next to it, although I don't suppose she would be too happy if you picked it. My bedroom is upstairs, and there are 2 empty bedrooms there, as well." She stared at him. "What is it?" he asked. She was thoroughly confused. I thought we would be sharing a bedroom, as a husband and wife should." "Oh," Robert said, his face turning red. "But I assumed you would need some time to get used to your new home." Rosie stepped closer to him. "I think the best way to get used to it is for me to feel at home." Now, she was definitely expecting a kiss, but it didn't come. Robert merely hugged her, his strong hands locking on the small of her back. "Of course," he said. "As you wish, Rosie." As they were about to head upstairs, a noise came from another room. A moment later, a woman whom Rosie could only assume was Robert's mother, appeared. "Hello," the frowning woman said, inspecting Rosie's face. "And who might you be?" "Mother, this is Rosie Geller." "Rosie Geller. She's my wife. I told you about her." Rosie put on her best smile, but it didn't appear to be adequate. Obviously, Robert had not discussed the matter sufficiently beforehand, and she was a shock to Robert's mother. The woman frowned more deeply, taking a closer look. "Wife, you say? And what makes you think she will be a good wife for you, Robert?" "I don't trust them eyes of hers." Rosie stiffened in surprise. "Mother, please. Rosie will help us turn things around. She's a nice girl and a hard worker." "We'll see about that," the woman snapped. With that, she turned and headed back to her bedroom, her door shutting behind her with a loud bang. Rosie felt her face go hot. Had she made an awful mistake, after all? Could she live under the same roof with a person who disliked her without even giving her a chance? Rosie felt a wall of uncertainty confront her, but when Robert took her hand, some of her confidence returned. "Let's get you situated, what do you say? Mother will get used to you, I promise. Please, be patient." That didn't sound very encouraging, but Rosie would take what she could get. As she followed Robert up the steps, her spirits fell. How in the world would she be able to bring any of her sisters there with Robert's sour mother? She knew without a doubt that the woman would never welcome them. It was apparent to her that Robert's mother would never allow any of them to come, even for a visit. She faltered on the stairs, but when Robert glanced back at her, she put on a smile and continued climbing. Robert showed her around on the 2nd floor, and she was pleasantly surprised with how clean everything was. She could well imagine her sisters living in the spare rooms. She sighed heavily. "What is it?" Robert asked. You don't like it, do you? No, I like it. It's just that I'm missing my home a little. Well, this is your home now, Rosie. I hope you will grow to be comfortable here. He left her in the main bedroom, giving her some space to unpack and change. She wished he would stay, as being close to him gave her the most comfort. But she appreciated how courteous he wasn't pushing himself on her. Rosie changed into fresh clothes, tucked her suitcase under the bed since she didn't know yet where to put her things, and went downstairs. Most of the day was still ahead, and as tempting as it was to take a rest, she wanted to make a good impression on both Robert and his mother. She found Robert in the kitchen, getting ready to cook. She watched him for a moment, as he brought vegetables up from the cellar and made a fire. Is there anything I can help you with? She asked. Do you mind making dinner? I will be happy to. She wondered why his mother didn't do the cooking, but she wasn't about to ask. Thank you. I still have some work to do around the farm, and Mother will be resting until the evening. What do you usually eat? She asked, rolling up the sleeves of her dress. Stew, vegetables. We still have some bread and biscuits, too, I think. She could work with that. All in all, Rosie thought she could make it work. She just needed to keep her head up and not let her worrisome thoughts take over. Chapter 6. As Rosie expected, Robert's mother was not pleased with her efforts. It's too hot, the woman complained. Robert, this is no good. She acted as if Rosie weren't even in the room, and that hurt. What was more, Robert wasn't defending her as much as Rosie would have liked. Mother, this is good food. Rosie did her best, and I like it. You should too. Please, let's just eat. Yes, I'll eat, the old woman said. If I have to. Robert put a hand on Rosie's knee under the table and squeezed it lightly. Rosie took that as a sign that he was on her side, after all. She was careful not to talk too much at dinner, remaining silent and respectful. Later that evening, they went upstairs. Rosie was the first to get under the blanket, but Robert sat in a chair, looking uncomfortable. Rosie wanted him to hold her, to get her warm, but for some reason, he was hesitant. In the end, beyond exhausted, she fell asleep before he joined her. There was little improvement over the next couple of weeks. Rosie did her best to tidy up the house and keep it that way, but Robert's mother was unappreciative and critical of everything she did. One day, when Robert was out in the field, his mother walked out of her room, wearing only a gown to have a drink of water in the kitchen. Rosie was at the table, writing a letter home. Don't you have anything better to do? The woman barked as she passed her. I do, Mrs. Geller. I'm waiting for Robert to take me to the market. Why can't you go on your own? Haven't your parents taught you how to ride a horse? Of course, but while you're at it, you can ride it all the way back east, or wherever Robert found you. We're better off on our own. Rosie worked to control her temper. She took a shaky breath. You don't need to be so nasty, she finally said in a small voice. Nasty? Mrs. Geller chortled. You ain't seen nasty, girl. Robert brought you into this house, gave you a home, yet there you are, scribbling away. Rosie put her letter away, but she didn't get up. Mrs. Geller sniffed loudly and left the room. Rosie's lower lip quivered, and she fought her tears. She didn't deserve such treatment. She went upstairs and finished her letter there. Then, she hid it in her bedroom and went outside to find Robert. Perhaps, fresh air would clear her mind and calm her down. She found Robert cutting tall hay at the far end of the farm, near the woods. He had been at it for a week now, and the winter supply in the barn was growing. She admired the hard work he had been putting into it, and it made her want to try and match it. Can I help? Rosie asked. He stopped and wiped his brow. Has my mother been giving you trouble, dear? It was the first time Robert had called her dear, and it put a smile on her lips. Nothing serious, she's just tired. Rosie said, and then wondered at herself. Why should she be making excuses for the old woman? So, what can I do? I used to help my father all the time, you know. I know, you mentioned it in your letters. You can grab that pitchfork and start filling up the cart over there, if you like. Can you do that? Of course. She began forking the grass, and after a few minutes, they fell into a nice rhythm. Back home, I sometimes helped my father collect hay for winter. Until my brother grew up. That's good that your parents have help, he said, but there was a note of sadness in his voice. I have a brother and 4 sisters. They'll be taking good care of the home soon enough. They're good children, friendly and helpful. I'm glad, Rosie. I see you can handle yourself out here, but are you sure you're not tired? Robert stopped and regarded her. With his shirt partially unbuttoned showing his chest, and his hair brushed back, he was even more handsome than usual. Rosie felt a tightness low in her stomach. She swallowed. I'll start back to the barn in a few minutes. She felt a sudden weakness, unsure if it was because she was fatigued or because she was standing there admiring his looks. Very well. Thank you for your help. Robert smiled at her, and Rosie returned it. A few minutes later, she grabbed the bridle of the horse and led him and the cart to the barn. This work wasn't that different from what she did back home, but the fact that she was helping her husband filled her with pleasure. She was really taking care of her own farm now, and that was deeply important to her. She unloaded the hay in the barn and took the cart back to Robert. He was surprised that she'd returned, but he didn't let it disturb his work. He simply gave her an appreciative nod. Don't forget that we need to go to the market, she told him, and Robert nodded again. He appeared deep in thought, or focused on his work, or both. She respected that. Her father had taught her that a man must always take his work seriously, especially work on his own farm. If her father's words were true, Robert was certainly a worthy husband and partner. Rosie walked back to the house, deciding to add a few more lines to her letter. Mrs. Geller was nowhere to be found, so she went upstairs and slipped into her bedroom. She had grown fond of the room over the days. She loved the cozy space with the narrow desk at the wall and the wide bed at the center. Robert was still rather stiff and hesitant with her, but they did sleep in the same bed, and that was a step in the right direction. There was a lot she wanted to tell her family, but she made sure to include only the best parts. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to complain either. She was married now, and that had been her choice. She just needed more time to bring everyone together. Rosie sealed the envelope and left it on the table, where she would take it into town. The house was quiet, and Robert was still out in the field. She could see him through the window. She decided to take a quick rest. She just hoped Robert's mother was occupied elsewhere. As she was falling asleep, Rosie tried to come up with something that would change the old woman's attitude, but in the end, she simply drifted off to sleep. Chapter 7. 2 more weeks passed, and Rosie still hadn't made any friends in Lawton City. They had ventured out to the market, but even Robert seemed to be withdrawn from the people in town, and Rosie didn't think he had any real friends there. She was lonely. She had been slowly falling in love with her husband and trying to tolerate her mother-in-law, but she wanted to meet new people. She made some acquaintances at the market, but those people saw her only infrequently. She was missing home more than ever. Thomas and their sisters always kept her company. Frequently, they went down to the river with her or to the town fair, but here on the Geller farm, it was all about work and more work. At least, she had sent another letter to her family and was looking forward to their next reply. Mama's anger had calmed down, and she was grateful for that. Papa seemed to be doing all right without her help. Thomas was stepping up, taking his place next to their father, learning to take care of the family. There was real pleasure in that. In one way, maybe it was good that she'd left. Everyone seemed to be coming together to get things done, things she used to do alone. Secretly, she still hoped that someday she'd get to bring some of her sisters out there to Nebraska to begin a new life with her. There wasn't much to do about that yet, but, on the positive side, she had plenty of time to work on her relationship with Robert's mother, and that was what she decided to focus on. That afternoon, Robert was out, as he usually was, so Rosie put on a fresh dress and went downstairs, hoping to make some progress with her mother-in-law. Mrs. Geller was knitting in her favorite rocking chair, looking out the window. Rosie fussed in the kitchen for a while and then walked over to have a talk, bracing herself for the usual harsh response. "How are you doing today, Mrs. Geller?" "I was doing just fine, before you showed up to torment me." "What do you need?" Rosie took a deep breath and forced a pleasant expression on her face. "Nothing is needed," she said. "I was just making sure you don't need anything." Mrs. Geller narrowed her eyes. "Are you talking back to me, girl? It would do you good to remember your place. You know, we were doing just fine before you showed up. Robert won't let me kick you out, but I swear, I want to." Rosie felt her heart rate increase and anger kindle in her chest. As calmly as she could, she said, "I don't intend to make your life hard, believe me. If anything, I want to make it easier on both you and Robert. Easy enough as is, thank you very much. You can go now. Let Robert call for me when it's time for dinner. And make sure it's tastier than the last time." Thoroughly discouraged, Rosie walked out of the room and then out of the house. The woman was impossible. How was she supposed to take care of the household when there was such opposition every living hour? She walked away from the house, holding back tears and telling herself things would get better, even though she was all but out of patience. Without knowing it, she walked all the way out into the field, stopping only when she noticed a few cows grazing in the sun. A light smile touched her lips, and she waved at the animals. Of course, they ignored her, but at least it was some company. How pathetic, she moaned inwardly. Cows for friends. Whoever heard of anything more dismal? When she saw Robert riding on the horizon, she didn't know how long she'd spent in the field. He was coming back from the city, she assumed, and she raised her hand to beckon him over. "What are you doing all the way out here, dear?" he asked, jumping off his horse. "Are you all right?" "Just taking a walk, Robert. Everything is fine." She averted her gaze, and that must have given her away. "Is my mother at it again?" Rosie nodded. "Why is she like that?" "I don't understand." Robert sighed, looking out across the fields. "It's a long story, Rosie. We have time. Please." They walked away from the animals, Robert holding her hand. As they walked, he told her about his mother's life. For the most part, it didn't sound that much different from the stories Mama and Papa used to tell her at night, but she had a feeling there was more to it. "My father died 3 years ago, at the very end of the war. A small battle, but he was wounded and soon succumbed to illness." She touched his arm. "It's all right. Mother took it hard. She became bitter. Mean. It did something to her. People stopped visiting. Friends abandoned her. For some time, it was just us and my sister." "You have a sister?" Rosie's tone was shocked. "I do, but we don't talk much. After our father died, Anna moved away. Much in the same way you have left your home." "I see. Is that why your mother doesn't like me?" Robert shrugged. "I suppose she sees Anna in you, and she believes Anna abandoned us. I hope to meet her one day. She should visit. Maybe she could reconcile with your mother." He looked doubtful. "I hope she will, but I don't think so. But Mother is so angry still, I'm afraid she wouldn't take kindly to her." Rosie was silent, digesting his words. It didn't make it any easier, but at least now she could understand Mrs. Geller's attitude a bit better. In reality, it had nothing to do with her. "Do you think there is anything I can do to help her see me for who I am?" "Give her some time. Work hard around the homestead, and she will see that you are here to help us. That's the only reason she tolerates me. Oh, I suppose she does love me. I don't know." He took off his hat and held it to his side. "You are my wife, Rosie, and you are not going anywhere. Sooner or later she will have to accept it." Rosie squeezed his hand and leaned into his side. "I like how that sounds, Robert. Me being your wife. I like it, too. I'm happy you're here, Rosie, and I'm grateful." Rosie kissed his cheek, and he gazed down at her. A smile lit up his face, and she realized just how much she wanted to see him smile more often. She understood now how much hardship his family had endured. Her own family had always been more optimistic, even when Papa came back from the war, so she had to remind herself that some people required a little more support than others. Chapter 8. As the days passed, Rosie learned to be more patient with Mrs. Geller. It didn't make any visible difference, but Rosie felt better about herself. She was waiting for a reply from her latest letter home, which always cheered her up. She was already composing her next letter in her mind. That day, chatter at the market was full of warnings of a possible storm heading toward Lawton City. Evidently, Mrs. Jansen's knees were acting up, which always indicated a coming storm. Another woman, Rosie thought her name to be Mrs. Turner, was complaining loudly of a bad shoulder. Between the two women, the whole market was in a stew. Rosie hoped it was nothing serious, because she would be spending the next few days on the farm without Robert. Robert had left early that morning. He'd had to take some cattle to Madison, where they made smoked meat, and the trip would bring them both money and food to store in the winter. Rosie wished she could go with him. However, Robert asked her to stay on the farm, as his trip could take several days. And of course, Mrs. Geller couldn't be left alone, nor could the farm. Reluctantly, she wished him safe travels. After returning from the market, she quickly finished a few more chores. There was not much to do around the house, as Rosie made sure to keep it clean and tidy at all times. She went outside to spend some time on the porch, frequently checking the sky for any signs of a storm. There was something magical about the day, a strange new calm which at first eased her fears. But when the dark clouds began to form, she became concerned. Still, there was no evidence of a storm, so she forced herself to remain hopeful. After a while, she decided to go inside, entertaining the idea of a short rest before making dinner. And just in time, too, because as soon as she closed the front door, she heard the first heavy raindrops on the porch roof. Within moments, things escalated. Rosie hurried around the house, making sure all windows were closed, grateful that she'd thought to close many of the shutters when she returned from town. The only windows she hadn't yet checked were in Mrs. Geller's bedroom. Rosie made sure to use the gentlest knock. "Please, make sure your window is shut," she called through the door. There was no reply, but by the sound of it, the window was shoved closed. "I think we're in for a big storm," Rosie added, and as she said the words, a flash of lightning lit up the house, followed by thunder a few moments later. The rain was clearly getting more intense. Rosie lit a candle and sat at the table in the main room, feeling unsettled. She hoped that Robert wasn't getting caught in this. Lord willing, he had traveled far enough to miss it. The winds picked up, making howling sounds through cracks and crevices around the windows. The rain drummed on the roof, plainly heard even on the first floor. Rosie had never experienced a storm quite so severe, and she was beginning to get worried. She prayed Robert had made it to some kind of shelter in time, and now feared that he wasn't far enough ahead of the storm. Another lightning strike flashed, followed closely by thunder rolling from left to right, as if it were focused right above the homestead. Rosie was starting to panic. A horrifying thought suddenly hit her: the cows. Stupid, stupid. Mrs. Geller abruptly rushed out of her bedroom, probably possessed by the same idea. Rosie had never seen her so agile and lively. "The livestock, you silly girl. Did you get them inside the barn?" Mortified, Rosie could only shake her head. "I knew I shouldn't have counted on you." With that, the woman hurried toward the front door, determined to go outside. "Don't. You can't go out there," Rosie shouted, jumping to her feet. The old woman ignored her. She swung the door open, and the room immediately filled blustering cold air and splattering rain. Mrs. Geller bent into the wind and stepped outside. Rosie followed her, yanking on her sleeve. "Please, stop. I'll get them," she cried, but the woman wouldn't listen. Rosie pulled harder on her, but she refused to stop. Outside, the storm raged, punishing the trees, sending leaves and branches flying through the rain. Rosie forged ahead, nearly blinded. She struggled across the mud, still trying to pull her mother-in-law back. The woman slipped from her grasp and rushed forward. Panic filled Rosie. Mrs. Geller was running toward the barn now. "Get back!" Rosie continued to holler into the wind. Mrs. Geller had reached the barn doors and was fighting to get them open. Rosie caught up with her as lightning again illuminated the world, thunder reverberating in her chest. Suddenly, she heard the sharp sound of wood cracking somewhere to her right. She feared a tree was falling, but it was just a branch. A gust of wind had stripped it of its leaves and picked it up in the air, hurling it in their direction. The moment Rosie saw it crashing through the air, she knew something horrid was about to happen. Mrs. Geller stopped her struggle and looked up. The next moment, the tree branch smacked hard into her head, knocking her cold. Rosie sucked in air, her eyes widening. She grasped the heavy branch and dragged it aside, off of Mrs. Geller. "Mrs. Geller," she screamed, putting her hands on each side of the woman's face. "Mrs. Geller." Mrs. Geller's eyes opened, and blood from her forehead mixed with the rain. "Come. I'll help you up." "We have to get you inside," Rosie urged, her voice filled with panic. Mrs. Geller hooked an arm around Rosie's neck and let her help her up. Together, they bent nearly double into the force of the rain and wind. Rosie struggled to keep them upright and moving, but Mrs. Geller was heavier than she looked. Rosie kept slipping in the mud, but she finally managed to get them back to the house. They nearly fell inside, and Rosie slammed the door shut and led the woman to her rocking chair. "You wait right here. Don't touch the wound." Mrs. Geller slumped into the chair. Rosie hurried to the pantry, where she knew they kept some clean rags. She snatched them up and hurried back. "Sit still now, and let me do this," she said. The old woman was shaking, cold and wet, and evidently too shocked to complain. "I just had to help the animals," she gasped out. I know. Don't speak now." Rosie quickly filled a basin with water and washed the wound and bandaged the woman's head. Rosie was relieved that the blood had made the gash look worse than it was. "My mother was a nurse during the war. She taught me a thing or two," Rosie said gently as she finished her work. "I hope so," the woman mumbled, and her voice gained some of its normal snap. "Stay here. I will take care of the animals." And with that, Rosie left her. Chapter 9. It was terrifying. Sharp blue flashes of light illuminated the sky, and the rain swirled, constantly changing directions. Rosie darted toward the direction of the barn, doing her best to avoid the flying branches. Her biggest fear now was being crushed by one of them or even by a falling tree. It was hard to see, but she could make out the cows far in the distance, scattered. Rosie swung one of the tall wooden doors open and hoped the wind wouldn't slam it closed again. There was no time to try and secure it in place. She ran into the field, painfully aware of how exposed she was. But she couldn't worry about herself, not now. If she was scared, what were the animals feeling? Rosie made a wide circle in the field, hollering and yelling, as she tried to herd the cows together in the general direction of the barn. At first, they seemed fixed in place, unwilling to move at all. She closed in, slapping some of them on their rumps, which didn't help. Finally, she ran to the front of one of the largest cows and stroked his nose in the drenching rain. "Come on, girl. Come on. You're all right," she said close to the animal's ear. Her feet were sinking deep in the muddy grass now, but she kept on, wheedling, urging the huge animal to move. When she was ready to give up, the cow started walking. Once that happened, the others followed. Rosie's tears mixed with the rain, as she coaxed the animals, getting them to the open door. In their panicked state, they moved, their eyes huge in the semi-darkness. Their lowing filled the air, so loud and sharp, Rosie felt it inside of her. "Get in there," she said, suppressing her fear she would be squashed by them. One by one, they went inside. "Get on with it," she urged, over the howling wind and rain. The winds had grown so strong that it was hard to keep her balance. Making it back to the house might be an impossible task. Her shoes were drenched and slipping, and she was losing her strength. When she finally got all the cattle inside, she pulled the heavy door shut behind her and collapsed against the wood, giving the cows a rueful smile. "I'll be staying with you," she said. "No way I'm going back out there tonight." The winds and the rain whipped against the barn, and the roof was leaking in some places, but it was still safer than the open fields. Rosie caught her breath and rubbed her arms, trying to warm herself. The storm held strong, and it didn't appear like it was going to die down anytime soon. If anything, it was gaining strength. Rosie worried about Mrs. Geller. She couldn't just leave her unattended in the house. She had to go back whether she wanted to or not. She shivered and cringed at the thought. But she could hardly desert her mother-in-law. "Wish me luck," Rosie muttered to the cows. She braced herself and pulled the door open a crack. Rain bulleted inside, stinging her face. She squinted against it and squeezed outside, yanking the door shut. The storm tore at her clothes, and the house seemed impossibly distant. She took it one step at a time, focusing as best she could on the faint light coming through the cracks of the shutters. She clutched her clothes to her and fought her way to the front door, almost giving up before she grabbed onto the door handle. She tore it open and fell inside. The gust of wind that entered with her blew out the candles. "Dear God," she exclaimed, slamming the door. She fumbled about for matches and lit the candles again. Even inside, the rain was deafeningly loud, crashing on the roof and against the walls outside. The good news was that the shutters were holding on, and Rosie could see no immediate damage, at least not on the first floor. "Are you all right, Mrs. Geller?" she called out. There was no response. Her pulse quickened for a second, but calmed down again, when she saw her mother-in-law still in her rocking chair. She hadn't moved since Rosie had left. She was breathing slowly, hands in her lap, her eyes closed. The bandage on her forehead needed to be changed, as the blood had soaked up a quarter of it. "Let me take a look at your wound," Rosie said, approaching her and carefully peeling off the bandage. Mrs. Geller's eyes shot open. "Don't touch me, girl, you've done enough." For the first time, Rosie felt entitled to give her a fierce look. Through her teeth, she said, "I will be taking a look." They held eye contact for a long moment, and Rosie wasn't the first one to blink. Mrs. Geller looked away, without a word. "That's better. Now, let's get rid of this." Rosie pulled away the bloody bandage, washed the wound again, and applied a new cloth. "See? That wasn't so hard now, was it?" The old woman grunted. "Did you put the animals away?" Rosie couldn't help a thin smile. "Yes, the cows are fine. Do you need anything? A drink of water, perhaps?" "That would be nice." Rosie stared at the woman. Her tone had been almost pleasant. Had Rosie finally done it? Had she finally broken through the woman's tough exterior? Was she finally going to be treated like a human being? Rosie went to the kitchen and returned with a cup of water for her mother-in-law and another one for herself. "Looks like it's only getting worse," Rosie said. Both women were looking at the window. Even though the shutters were closed, there were enough of a gap on one of the windows to see a bit outside. "So loud," Mrs. Geller said. "Would you like to go to your room? Lie down a bit?" "I was going to do that anyway," the old woman said, sounding annoyed again. Rosie grinned ruefully. If Mrs. Geller was strong enough to complain, it was only a matter of time before she was feeling herself again. "Let me help you," Rosie said and took away her cup. Reluctantly, the woman complied, and Rosie helped her to her bedroom. She had not been in there before, and the fact that Mrs. Geller allowed her in was another good sign. "Do you need more water?" Rosie asked. "I'm fine. Close the door on your way out. I need to rest. Lord knows I wouldn't be in this fix if it weren't for your stupidity with them cows." Of course. Rosie was too tired to be angry with her, and, surprisingly, she was starting to find her crankiness comforting, in a way. "I'll be upstairs. If you need me, just holler." There was no reply. Upstairs, Rosie took off her wet clothes and squeezed the water out of them into a bucket. She hung her dress from a peg on the wall. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do until the storm passed. She changed into dry clothes and climbed under the blanket. Only then did she realize how truly tired she was. It had been a horrible day, and she couldn't wait for her husband to return to help her sort things out. With those thoughts, Rosie closed her eyes and fell asleep. Chapter 10. The storm must have roared for several more hours. At some point, a tree fell with an ear-splitting crack, and another one was struck by lightning. It didn't catch fire, thankfully, but it did interrupt Rosie's sleep in the most unwelcome manner. There had been no dreams, only the sound of rain on the roof, drumming and drumming, until it finally ceased in the wee hours of the morning. Rosie slept again and then woke up very early with a headache. She was even more tired than before she'd gone to bed. She crept downstairs and put on boots and a coat. The house was blissfully quiet, and she assumed that Mrs. Geller was still sleeping. Outside, the ground was soggy, almost a swamp in some places, but she managed to make a circle around the house, assessing the damage. The house was intact, but the area around it looked like a battlefield. Now Rosie truly wished that Robert would return as soon as possible. She would never be able to clean all of it by herself. She heard the cows in the barn and hurried to let them out. They were safe but restless. They hesitated to come out, but once one of them did, the rest of them followed, making their way into the field. Everything else seemed to be in place. Satisfied with her inspection, Rosie went back inside. She wanted to rest further but knew she couldn't. There was much to do, starting with breakfast. When it was almost ready, she walked to Mrs. Geller's bedroom door and knocked lightly. "Good morning. I brought you some tea." "Come in," Mrs. Geller replied from the other side of the door. Rosie entered, and found the old woman sitting up in her bed, the bandage no longer on her head. The wound was swollen, but it was no longer bleeding, which was good. "Just a scratch," Rosie said. "A scratch I got because you didn't lock up them cows. So you've told me numerous times." "I'm sorry." "You should be." Mrs. Geller took the tea and drank. "Truly, I'm sorry you got hurt. But I wanted to thank you. Thank you for all you did last night. You were a real hero rushing outside like that." Rosie smiled at her. "True, you wouldn't listen to reason. You're mighty stubborn, but I guess you already know that. Still, you were wonderful. And I know we can work together to make this house a better home for us all, and I'm sure Robert would agree with me. All I ask is for you to help me as much as I try to help you." Mrs. Geller didn't say anything for a long moment. Rosie's smile faded. It was useless. What was the point of trying to get through to a person who didn't care to listen to you? "I've made breakfast. You can come out when you want to." Despite everything, Rosie did feel a connection to the woman. She respected her struggle and wished life would become better for her. Rosie ate breakfast alone, which really dampened her spirits. Without Robert there, she felt completely unwelcome in the house. At least, the weather was improving. The clouds began to dissolve, and the first hints of sun were on the horizon. Still, Rosie wore her coat and boots to the barn, where she got the small cart. She didn't harness the horse, but pulled it outside herself, situating it between the barn and the house. She enjoyed the fresh, clean air and picking up tree branches that morning felt rather nice. By afternoon, most of the grounds were clear, and the sun showed up in full force. Rosie looked about, pleased with her progress. The heavier branches would have to wait for Robert's help. She was about to go back inside, when she spotted Robert coming back home. Her heart lurched with relief and pleasure. She waved with both hands and started toward him, so grateful he was really there. "Robert," she shouted. His horse increased its speed to a gallop, and Robert all but jumped off before the horse had stopped. He swept Rosie off her feet and spun her around, his arms tightly around her. When her feet finally touched the ground again, he bent down and kissed her soundly on the lips. Rosie felt instant goosebumps all over her body. "Rosie, I was so worried." He drew back and looked at her. "You all right?" Rosie nodded, and her eyes filled with tears. "I was scared you'd been caught in it," she said. How did you get back so quickly? He grabbed her to him and squeezed her again. I stayed in a settlement on the other side of Lawton and waited out the storm. I left the cattle there, because as soon as the rain stopped, I had to come back here to check on you. He kissed her again, and his lips were cool and soft. Rosie clung to his neck. I'm so glad you're back, she whispered. And Mother? Is she all right, too? Rosie nodded. We had just a bit of trouble, but she's fine. He breathed out in relief. I'll want to hear everything. He looked around. You've been cleaning up? I saw fallen trees everywhere on my way here. There's one in the back, but I did my best to get rid of most of the fallen branches. There's still a lot to do. Oh, it's good to have you here, Robert. I need to go see Mother. You say you had some trouble? Nothing too serious. A branch caught her, and she has a hurt forehead. I took care of it, though. And she let you? His face registered his surprise. Believe it or not, she did. She's resting, but we should go inside. They did, hand in hand, and in that moment, Rosie truly felt that they were husband and wife, working together. Inside, they found Robert's mother back out in the front room in her chair. She had opened the shutters and was gazing out the window. Robert approached her and got down on one knee. Mother, how are you? Rosie told me what happened. Are you better? Did she also tell you it happened because of her? Rosie groaned. She's right. I didn't get the cows inside in time. It had been her fault, but she wished Mrs. Geller didn't take such pleasure in pointing it out. She had expected things to change between them after their ordeal, but perhaps it was simply too much to ask. But she did get the cattle into the barn in the end, didn't she? Robert asked. She did, the woman admitted bitterly. Rosie turned away, not wanting to be there for the rest of the conversation. She had tried her best yesterday, but nothing seemed to budge Mrs. Geller. She left the room, leaving Robert to it. She was hungry and tired, and that was affecting her mood, as well. She grabbed an apple from the pantry and decided to go sit on the porch for a while. As she crossed the main room and headed toward the door, she overheard Robert and his mother still talking. She noticed the tone of the woman's voice, which was low and almost soothing. Startled, Rosie paused. You think so? Robert was asking. Yes, his mother replied. She did an admirable job out there. Risky, but she managed it. And she was nice with me. I can see that. Your head looks to be getting better already. The woman snorted. I suppose. I have to admit, Robert, the girl does know a thing or two. But she was still awful stupid to leave them cows out. Robert chuckled, but Rosie knew he wasn't laughing at her. There was relief in his tone and affection. Rosie stayed where she was, still not really believing what she'd heard. Mrs. Geller had actually said something nice about her, even if she refused to say it to her face. Rosie grinned and went outside. The sun was bright, and she sat on the porch bench and closed her eyes. The apple was sweet. The wind played with her hair, and the breeze was warm on her skin. Chapter 11. Rosie must have drifted off briefly, because when she came to, her apple was on the floor and already brown where she had bitten it. The sound of the front door opening woke her up, and Robert came out and joined her on the porch. He picked up the apple, inspected it, and then tossed it far out into the field. He sat beside her. How are you feeling, dear? You went through quite an ordeal. I did. But I'll go in and fix you dinner in a minute. But can we stay out here a bit longer? Of course, he replied. He put his hand on her knee, and Rosie put hers over it. You know, it's amazing how you handled everything, Rosie. I'm truly grateful. You think so? She asked. Of course. You saved my mother. Did she say that? She told me, just now, how you helped her, and how you took care of the livestock. Frankly, I was surprised. I didn't think she would ever admit anything good about you out loud, but she did. I think that secretly, she likes you a lot, Rosie. She has an odd way of showing it, Rosie said with a smile. Even this little bit of affection was worth more to her than she could have ever imagined. I understand how hard it is, Robert, but like I said, we will learn to get along just fine. I know she cares about the farm and you. You should have seen how brave she was, running out to save those cows. Robert laughed, and she laughed with him. There was nowhere she would rather be than right there on the porch with her husband, sharing a laugh. She hoped that one day soon she'd be able to share a laugh with her mother-in-law, too. Robert kissed her lightly on the lips. I'm sorry, Rosie, that it's been hard for you over the past weeks. And I'm sorry that I haven't been more help to you. It's fine, dear, really. At first, I was afraid you would hate it here. It can be dirty and bleak, and then, my mother. Robert, please. She took his hand. She could feel the sadness in his heart. I'm here, by your side. I am your wife, and I will never be embarrassed by you or our home. Rosie. Her name was soft on his lips. She leaned close to his ear and whispered, I think I might be falling in love with you, Robert Geller. He turned and took her in his arms. Ah, Rosie. You make me the happiest farmer in Nebraska. They laughed together, and then he grew sober. I love you, Rosie. She lay her head on his shoulder. Do you want to go inside now? You could use a few hours of sleep. She nodded and snuggled closer to him. He held her for a moment, and then got up, pulling her to her feet. Inside, Rosie saw that Mrs. Geller had gone to her bedroom, as well, and they had the house to themselves. They went upstairs and into their bedroom, their hands never letting go of one another. We will be good together, Rosie, Robert said, taking her in his arms. We will be better than good, she assured him. And together, they lay on the bed, holding each other close. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.